So let's talk then about centrists. We'll start with the centrists in Britain, and then we can move to the centrists in Europe, Yanis. Keir Starmer declared that globalization is dead. It's over, which I think certain informed observers were wondering what took him so long perhaps to identify. How should the UK adapt to a world in which globalization is dead? Maybe even he'll go one step further and say that sort of neoliberalism's over, although I'm not so sure about that. Starmer's kind of said, we're going to respond cool, calm-headed. We've got a range of levers we can use in response, retaliatory tariffs, etc. But I think he's just
the benefits of the disabled.
Yeah. There's some other marginalised community we could make poorer in response to this. I mean, look, they're going to have to do something, right? Because Reeves's fiscal headroom has been evaporated again by these tariffs, right? So there will have to be they could raise taxes, they could change the fiscal rules, or they could cut benefits for someone. I don't know, but yes, I just sort of.
I think they will do all that because they're lacking any sensible plan. Everything you said they will do. They will change the fiscal rules, they will tax more, they will attack some marginalized social group because they have no plan.
Well, God, that's an optimistic note, isn't it? When you put it as simply and bluntly as that.
Before we shift to optimism, we have to realize the predicament we find ourselves in. Otherwise, we're just fools.
Yeah.
Right. Look, the problem that Britain has is this. I remember when I moved to Britain in 1978. It was just before the winter of discontent. Britain at the time was in a very precarious position, but at least it had a business model that worked. There were several quite strong industries. They were fading. They were particularly inefficient. But at least there was a business model. You had these industries. You had council houses that made sure that there was no housing crisis in Britain when I moved to Britain in the late 1970s. And then Thatcher comes in and appends all that. The Nixon shock or the Trump shock was nothing like the Thatcher shock that I experienced in your country when I lived there. What she does is, she decides to financialize the housing market. So she takes the council homes and sells them to the working class, which of course then takes a huge amount of new debt. And once the working class is financialized, it ceases to be radical. Because when you owe to the banker, then it's not easy to strike. And then at the same time, she attacks the four main unions, the mine workers, the steel workers, the printers, and so on, the rail workers, closes everything down. So she uses the strategy of the American generals in Vietnam who, to get rid of the Viet Cong, to burn the whole place up, the jungle with Agent Orange. So she did the same thing. She shut down all the major industries of Britain. So suddenly you have a business model which is based simply on financialization. You have the financialization of the house. You have public utilities that are being sold to the public as part of shareholders' democracy, but in a manner that ensures that within 48 hours, all the shares that were dispersed across Britain through selling them below their market value, they were sucked up, siphoned into the City of London, and suddenly you had the big monopolies owning British Gas and so on. And that was a Ponzi scheme because it was only financialization which was allowing Britain to increase its GDP on the basis of essentially of hot air and of turning the country into a major deficit spender. You have a huge trade deficit, and essentially meaning that unless the City of London continues to attract foreign capital to keep buying out your country, then your country simply has no chance. Now that was a very long-term, slow-burning Ponzi scheme, and it took a Trump or some kind of calamity to make sure that ends. And so when Keir Starmer says that globalization ends, effectively what he means is that the Ponzi scheme that Thatcher built and Tony Blair built upon, turbocharged, because this is what Blair and Brown did, that is over now. But Mr. Starmer, what is the plan now? There is no plan. The plan that a Labour government should be designing, putting together, and implementing should be all about converting the excessive liquidity in the financial circuits of the City of London into actual productive green investments for Britain. But Rachel Reeves is simply constitutionally, biologically incapable of conjuring up such a scheme, or even imagining that it is possible to have such a plan.
It contradicts her very nature. Yeah, I guess even last time you and I spoke in this studio I'm sat in now, we were talking about technofeudalism, and even the sort of the paltry measures by which the British state attempts to impose some degree of levy, a sort of 2% digital services tax, which raises hundreds of billions of pounds, by the way, for such a low sum, and they're sort of talking about scrapping that as well. So you're kind of it's sort of, you look at the. Well, you feel it almost has like a disassociative effect on you, right? Because you without a particularly informed position, very few people know libertarian tech CEOs, but they look at the companies they run and they appear to be incredibly powerful and incredibly wealthy, and they look at the way that they're not really touched by democratic organisations or ostensibly democratic organisations like the governments in the UK, for example, and you're sort of sat there wondering, well, why on earth there appears to be all of this money in our economic system. It's just me, the little guy, that keeps getting fucked. Why can't we do something to the big guys? And because of that, I guess you see this people checking out from politics, from media, from like civil society, because the world that they think they recognise, or that what appears so obvious to them, and you've got Rachel Reeves and Starmer's just sort of ignoring it, right? Or that would be impossible. We never could.
Well, because look, ever since Thatcher shifted Britain from an industrial society to a financialized society, it was rentier financial accumulation that ruled the roost in London. It's all about accumulating paper money, and to hell with industry, with making things. The fact that there's still some things being made in Britain is just a miracle of patriotism by individuals. And you just made me remember the venom with which the Labour Party was treated under Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell, because they had an industrial policy. They had a policy of creating a new investment bank, the National Investment Bank, that would work together with the Bank of England to divert billions away from this merry-go-round of paper money chasing after paper money into producing actual green investments. And whenever I spoke even to Tories who had anything to do with industry, they were very enthusiastic about that. Of course, they wouldn't dare say it in public or in front of a camera. But this, I think, is absolutely fascinating. The fact that if the minority of British industrialists who still survive, as opposed to financiers who thrive, they are, in a way, vassals in this almost feudal financial cloud system that we live in. But they have no voice, really. The British Chamber of Commerce is no longer interested in industry. They are no longer even representing the interests of people who actually make stuff, like, factories.